CARICOM-CANADA Policy Series, as you know, is an occasional series organized by CARICOM diplomatic missions here in Ottawa as part of our public diplomacy efforts, and to bring really focused attention to one of the region's most enduring and important relationships, the partnership with Canada. I am Sherry Tross. I'm the High Commissioner of St. Kitts and Nevis to Canada and Dean of the CARICOM Heads of Diplomatic Missions here in Ottawa. And I am delighted to be representing them in co-hosting this session. We look forward to bringing together experts from all over to share their perspectives. They're from different disciplines, and their combined knowledge, we feel, adds to the base of knowledge as they share their unique perspectives on policies for tackling existing and emerging challenges, and also offer suggestions and creative ideas about how we can look at some of these issues and optimize opportunities for creating ever stronger and more effective cooperation with Canada. Today's session has been jointly organized with the Canada Caribbean Institute at Brock University and the Ottawa chapter of the Canadian International Council, both of which are represented today by Ambassador Robert Reddy, my co-host, who will moderate the upcoming panel. Those of you who have joined us before will recognize that today's session builds on the recent forum that focused on a post-COVID agenda, and it goes a step further. At its root, really, are some fundamental questions. Does strengthening the relationship between Canada and CARICOM mean reshaping that relationship? What might a Canada-CARICOM relationship look like going forward, given the fundamental shifts that are occurring within the region and internationally? And what steps can be taken to ensure that this partnership addresses the issues that are of paramount importance for the region to achieve sustainable and resilient growth? The universality of the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact of climate change, the cascading impact of geopolitical tensions on economies worldwide and global supply chains. These have all highlighted the intersectionality of challenges. And we know that the social, economic, political, and technological transformations of this 21st century have been more rapid than at any other time during a similar span in world history. And this evolutionary construct presents inherent challenges, but also opportunities for future planning. I think also that most of us would agree that the changing geographies of development mean that countries have to adjust policies, programs, and partnerships in the continuous pursuit of economic growth, good governance, security, and stability. Caribbean countries, yes, we lack military might and economic muscle, and we rely on legal frameworks, strategic partnerships, the international rules-based order, and the use of artful diplomacy in both the multilateral and bilateral space as important safeguards for ensuring development and security needs. And at this moment of transition, I am pleased to say that there is momentum in Canada-CARICOM diplomacy and dialogue. Senior officials from the region and Canada now meet regularly. Our foreign ministers have met twice in the last 2 years, most recently a month ago, and tackled issues surrounding regional security, multilateral cooperation, economic recovery, as well as the region's insistence on looking at the development and implementation of a multidimensional vulnerability index. I wish to pause here to recognize the excellent Caribbean team at Global Affairs Canada that have really been behind this momentum. In the next few weeks, as we all know, the region's heads of state and government will be sitting at the same table at 2 summits, at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, where many of the issues discussed today will be broached. But I'd like to posit that if, as Winston Dokaran in his recent book, which I'm sure many of you already have, if, as he posits, the Caribbean is on the edge, then the time is indeed right to engage in the kind of robust brainstorming and consistent diplomacy that can help to reimagine the future. Partners bring different capacities, constraints, and vulnerabilities. And small states can sometimes be solution multipliers. And I speak specifically in this case to the climate change issue. Because as first responders on the front lines of climate change, Caribbean countries have an important role to play as essential partners in the race toward mitigation, adaptation, and survival. Our panelists will offer insights on concrete ways in which both the public and private sectors can build a more inclusive and sustainable path to resilient development. And we look forward to hearing from them. But first, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce the Honorable Greg Fergus, who will share some opening remarks. You will see his full bio in the chat, but there are a couple of things I'd like to say about Greg Fergus, Member of Parliament of Canada. In addition to representing his constituency in Parliament, he wears several really important hats. He's Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and to the President of the Treasury Board. He's an advisor to the Privy Council, and he's the Director of the Canada-Africa Parliamentary Association, Vice President of the Canada-Germany Interparliamentary Group, and for our purposes, for today, most importantly for us, he is co-chair of the Canada CARICOM Parliamentary Friendship Group. So I wish to welcome him. He knows Canada, he knows the Caribbean, and we look forward to hearing from him. Mr. Fergus.
Well, thank you very much, High Commissioner. I really do appreciate it. It's sort of odd for us to be so formal in addressing each other, but I am very, very pleased to join you and to join all folks who have dialed on for today to participate in today's reflections. Before I begin, I'd like to recognize that I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. And I am very grateful to be able to stand here on their land and to continue to do the work that I do. Certainement, je sais parce qu'une importante partie de votre communauté parle français, alors ça me donnerait un plaisir de vous adresser la parole aussi en français puis en anglais. Et j'espère que tout le monde va se sentir libre à le faire. Before I begin, let me just tell you a little bit about why I think this relationship, why our government feels that this relationship is very important. I think the first off is that for too long in Canada, we have often we have rested on our laurels in terms of our relationship with CARICOM countries. We did a lot of great work over many decades, and we continue to do important work in the region. But the closer contact that we need between our heads of diplomatic missions, between our officials, between that people-to-people ties. Although we do a lot of the work, we don't talk about it, and we don't place it up, I believe, in terms of at the level that it should be at. I was fortunate to be first asked to be part of what should have been a meeting of the Prime Minister as well with the CARICOM heads of government mission back in March of 2020. But as you can recall, a certain little thing called the pandemic interfered. The Prime Minister wasn't able to attend, so I attended with our Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, for Global Affairs at the time, the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne. And it was a very eye-opening meeting with the typical frankness that I have known from my parents and from my aunts and uncles who come from the Caribbean region, people told us in very straight terms, we like you, we appreciate what you've done in the past, but we need to see more of you today. And that message was well received. At the time, the Prime Minister had every intention of inviting the CARICOM heads of government to a meeting in Ottawa. But of course, the pandemic did intervene. So 2 years on now, we have come through the pandemic. Now is the time for us to follow through on that commitment, to making sure that we are engaging, that the CARICOM countries and Canada work together. I think part of the big reason why that is important is for reasons that you had mentioned, High Commissioner, during your introductory remarks. We are not going to be, Canada and the CARICOM, a great and very persuasive or dissuasive military power. Might will not make right in terms of our relationship. What draws us together are values. What draws us together is a desire to making sure that the rule of law is followed. And if for no other reason, what we've been seeing over the last number of years, and especially most recently in Europe, it's important for us to stick together, to deepen those ties, to making sure that those values that bind us and unite us are the ones that the world follows. There is strength in numbers. We need to make sure that we are working together in that regard. Now, those are fine values to have, but it's very important that we make sure that we also take care of the more day-to-day, the more daily concerns between us, whether it is in terms of development, whether it's in terms of immigration, in terms of education, in terms of working to strengthen the institutions which governs all of our countries. These are things that we need to make sure that we work on together. This is the reason why Senator Moody, Rosemary Moody, and I, as co-chairs of the Canada CARICOM Friendship Group, revived the organization just before the pandemic. And why we continue, and I was just speaking with Senator Moody as recently as 2 days ago, why we will continue to push forward to making sure that this closer to closer parliamentary ties do continue. C'est vraiment important que nous prenons chaque opportunité, chaque occasion d'enraciner ce rapport et ce rassemblement de valeurs qui nous unissent. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle je pense que c'est important que le travail qu'on fait aujourd'hui en coopération avec l'Université Brock, avec tous les professeurs qui sont assemblés, les distingués invités, surtout nos corps diplomatiques du Canada ainsi que des pays du CARICOM, qu'on continue à faire ce travail-là aujourd'hui, qu'on prépare le chemin pour des rapports politiques et parlementaires plus proches et qu'on continue à s'assurer qu'on va livrer la marchandise pour nos peuples respectifs. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to take part in the discussions to kick off this event. And I really look forward to our what will result from today's discussions and all the concrete ways that we can go forward together. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner Trost and Honorable Greg Fergus for those welcome remarks. I would like to add my brief welcome. My name is Robert Reddy. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa. I have to say I'm trying to decide whether the timing of this event is ironic, timely, or reflective of a new normal, because it's now 5 days after we had a devastating storm hit Ottawa. There are still thousands without power. 10 people are dead, at least 10 dead in the city and region following the storm. the reality of climate change, aging infrastructure, et cetera, is increasingly a problem for Canada. But we all know that the vulnerabilities we may face pale in comparison to the challenges of small island developing states, in particular in the Caribbean. And it seems to me we have a joint interest in addressing those issues going forward. And it's becoming more and more of an urgent priority. I really look forward to this discussion today and having some focus on those and other issues. We're joined by some excellent presenters and a large number of attendees. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody's sense of protocol, but I'm not going to be spending a lot of time going over the background and accomplishments of speakers. We do have a bit of a time crunch. So bios are available online. You can find all of the background necessary there. So I will be just making short introductions of speakers as we go forward. Just one thing I would like to add to High Commissioner Tross's reference to the Canada Caribbean Institute. It's certainly, Brock is certainly a principal partner in that institute, but there are, of course, 6 universities in Canada and 6 universities in the Caribbean who formed the institute. UE, of course, being the principal anchor in the CARICOM in the Caribbean. So just a few administrative items before we start. The event is being recorded, as you will have seen, and will be posted to various websites following the event. Given the large number of attendees, we are disabling the chat function. Questions and comments, however, can be submitted by the Q&A application, which is found at the bottom of the screen. I will pose questions to the presenters, some that I may have, some that come in over the Q&A. We're not going to get a chance to ask all of the questions, I'm pretty sure, but we will be consolidating them and sharing them with presenters, and hopefully sharing them with Canada and CARICOM officials for their information and reference going forward. And there may well be ideas in those chats about future events to have a particular focus. So I look forward to the day, and without further ado, I'm going to turn to Ambassador Ford for her remarks. Just very briefly, Ambassador Ford is the Assistant Secretary General of Foreign and Community Relations of the Caribbean Community. She is a trained linguist and public administrator, and has served in the diplomatic service of Barbados for some time. And I look forward, Ambassador, to your remarks. So I'll turn the mic over to you. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Reddy, thank you. High Commissioner Tross, Minister Fergus, fellow panelists, thank you very much for this invitation and for the opportunity to share a CARICOM perspective into the discussions. And we truly welcome this opportunity. It was refreshing to listen to Minister Fergus and his appreciation for the frankness with which our CARICOM leaders tend to engage. Sometimes that can be a little shocking for those of us who don't know us and who don't understand, our propensity for frankness. And so, it is really refreshing to hear you start off on what you would call in French, this piste. So I really appreciate your opening comments, sir. Let me, at the outset, commend organizers for organizing this important event. The whole subject of the CARICOM-Canada relationship is extensive, and I know our time is limited. And I expect that Professor Knight will delve more deeply into the history of that relationship. But suffice to say that Canada has been a longstanding development partner and a friend of CARICOM. Certainly as a Barbadian, I think that Canada might have been the first country with which we established diplomatic relations. So Canada is family, not just a political partner. And as Minister Fergus would have pointed out, on policy matters, the Canadian government shares the community's interest and understanding on a number of key issues. You mentioned climate change, but the whole concept of the notion of small states and the need for special and differential treatment. The ties to Canada and CARICOM can be traced back to the early 18th century, when there was an exchange of Canadian fish and lumber for items that still remain our staples to this day, to Caribbean rum and molasses and spices. And that sparked a strong, abiding, and this special relationship, which continues to this day and which has been deepened through engagement at the political level from successive Canadian governments and through significant investment and support from Canada for the CARICOM region's development priorities. Also, Minister Fergus is an example of the strengthened people-to-people linkages, because in the Caribbean diaspora in Canada, recent statistics show that we are close to 1 million. And also there are a large number of Canadians who've made the Caribbean their home. And even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the Caribbean had received was receiving more than 2 million Canadian tourists annually. Up to 2012, political engagement between CARICOM and Canada was fairly regular, and it has tended to take place at the level of heads of government or foreign ministers. And normally this has been within the wing of hemispheric and important meetings, such as the Summit of Americas, coming up in very short time. Sherry would have mentioned the Commonwealth heads of government and regular sessions of the United Nations General Assembly. And we're all members of the we're also members of the Organization of American States. But it is noticeable, and as Minister Fergus also pointed that out, that the interactions dwindled quite significantly. And this was especially so during the period of 2012 to 2017. And so with the view to formalizing the deepening of these relations, the government of Canada in 2002 accredited its first ambassador to the community. And that post is currently held by Ambassador Mark Berman, who is a very strong partner and engages frequently with the CARICOM Secretariat. In 2007, Canada also announced a Caribbean program strategy, which included $6 million Canadian aid package for CARICOM for bilateral and regional activities. Canada also continues to be the largest contributor to the Caribbean Development Bank, and along with the United Kingdom is the largest non-regional shareholder of the CDB. Former CARICOM chairs, recently the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, and the then President of Haiti were invited by the Prime Minister of Canada in June 2018 to participate at the Outreach for Leaders session of the 4th G7 Summit on the Oceans. And this invitation, which was very important for CARICOM, afforded leaders the opportunity to sensitize their G7 counterparts, the G7 counterparts of Canada, to some of the issues of importance to the region. The relationship between Canada and CARICOM has indeed heightened since the assumption to office of Prime Minister Trudeau in 2015. And in recent years, there have been a number of high-level and ministerial engagements and the strengthening of cooperation activities between the parties. So this represents a reset which we are taking advantage of. And we have been working closely with Global Affairs Canada and within the framework of a structured platform, the CARICOM-CANADA Foreign Ministers Group. And the work of this platform, this ministerial framework, is supported by the CARICOM-CANADA Dialogue, a mechanism comprising senior officials. We are currently actively engaged with our Canadian colleagues, Carmen Sorget and her team, in formalizing the process for transforming our current structure into a permanent mechanism for more regular and frequent engagements and continued cooperation in a more structured way. Because despite all of the collaboration that we've had over the years, we've never had a formal and a permanent mechanism of engagement. And we are still optimistic that this mechanism would be launched at an upcoming CARICOM-CANADA Summit later this year. Because indeed, as Minister Fergus pointed out, that summit we are anxious to engage Prime Minister Trudeau directly, and especially since he wasn't able to travel to the Caribbean last time. So this summit has been long in coming, and we're looking forward to the opportunity when we can announce that it will be taking place. Canada and CARICOM, we have at the ministerial level agreed on a roadmap, a list of mutually important priority areas for follow-up on which we are actively engaged. And this list of priority issues has assumed even more urgency and intensity as we are all working to recover from the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we continue to face the challenges which are continually wrought on our economies and on our communities by climate change. The whole question, the war in Ukraine, has further exacerbated the social and economic impacts of the pandemic on global supply chains and rising fuel costs, and as well as the rising costs of food and fertilizer. Climate change and climate impacts, the inadequate access to concessional financing and appropriate debt relief, the problems that we face, and I'm sure that our panelists, Therese, will speak to the whole question of blacklisting and the withdrawal of correspondent banking relations. And these have compounded the challenges and serve to heighten the region's anxieties as we seek to recover and rebuild our economies. CARICOM member states, as always, but even more so now in the present, have been compelled to define new priorities and reshape partnerships with international partners. And that's why Canada continues to be an important partner. Because with Canada, we have sought to recalibrate our relationship and to reaffirm the dynamic partnership and renewed commitment to joint actions to address the global challenges that face us. And at this point, I'd like to indicate our support and satisfaction for the trade mission, which Minister Eng led here to the Caribbean region recently. A virtual mission, but with in-person, but with in-market participation in 4 of the CARICOM countries: Canada, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago were the participants. We would hope that we can see similar initiatives in the future focusing on the OECS countries, and also opportunities for CARICOM countries to showcase their marketing, their service and their offerings in Canada. Canada and CARICOM have also committed
Ambassador,
to building.
if I could just jump in, I just
Sure.
wanted to flag that we're starting to have a bit of a time crunch, so just bear that in mind as you wrap up. Okay.
Sure, I can wrap up basically to
Thank
identify the key priorities for collaboration: climate change, financing for development, COVID-19 response and recovery, and basically to emphasize that Canada and CARICOM remain long-standing friends, strong international development partners, And we, the CARICOM, we look to continue to work closely with Canada, and we hope that Canada will continue to support us and to use their influence in the international donor community to support development and to help us to achieve our development goals. Thank you. And I apologize for going on a little longer than I might have. Thank
Ambassador, no need to apologize. I feel badly asking you to wrap it up. But we do have a time crunch, but it maybe suggests we need to do more of these in the future. I will be now turning to ask Therese Turner-Jones to take the mic. Therese is the former general manager of the Caribbean Department at the Inter-American Development Bank, now an international consultant. She's had a career with other IFIs as well, and is a published author on matters of economics related to the Caribbean. So Therese, over to you, please. And I'll keep an eye on the time, and I'll jump in when we need to wrap it up, okay?
Thank you, Robert. I feel really special to be among this group of diplomatic experts. I want to thank the CIC and Ambassador Tross for inviting me to attend and participate in this panel this morning. It's really hard to focus in such a short space of time on all of the economic challenges that face the region, but a number have been mentioned already, and I think we've seen, as Winston Ducaran pointed out in his book, we've been on the edge for about 15 years now, since 2008, and probably even before that, but now exacerbated by not just the war in Ukraine, but the war in Ukraine has seen commodity prices spike. We've seen inflation spikes. So the challenges on the economic front for policymakers in our region are really severe, because the pandemic saw unemployment levels rise to extremely high levels throughout the region. And only now we're starting to catch our breath in terms of some resuscitation, for example, of tourism. Commodity prices will help countries like Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and others that produce commodities. But the other economies, the service dependent economies that rely on tourism, are really finding that their debt levels are continuing to rise, and so problems persist. Now, I think we all know that this has been a sort of way we can describe the Caribbean region for a long time. But what are the solutions to some of these long-standing problems that we face? And reference is made to small developing states earlier. And yes, there are particularities that affect small island development states in particular, and small developing states. But I want to say that we're living in an age, and this was also mentioned by Ambassador Tross, of exponential technology use and adaptation, and the way that we live our lives, and the way that even democracy in our region is being managed because of information now that's coming from all kinds of sources, not necessarily the ones that we like. But I think we're living in a world where young people in our region don't see themselves as being just Caribbean citizens, but are global citizens. And we all should see the whole region as being part of a global environment. What I think has been the biggest problem for the region over the last probably 2 decades is the fact that our integration into the global economy has been much slower than some other regions. And that's causing some of the impact of these global economic events and shocks to have a disproportionate impact on the region and our potential. So I put the solutions in a couple of buckets, and reference is made to, I like the use of PPP that doesn't mean public-private partnership, but policies, programs, and partnerships. If we want to build on the SDG number 17, which is basically all about partnerships to improve the livelihoods of citizens in small island developing states and countries around the world. And this is central to our conversation this morning, is how do we get to those solutions through partnerships with Canada, for example. And if we take sustainability as a big umbrella for where we can see these opportunities, we need to think about what are the enablers of sustainability. And sustainability is not just a buzzword now that you see in corporate messages, but it's real. Robert mentioned that there was a storm in Ottawa just a couple of days ago. So the whole impact of climate change is not just on small island developing states like the Caribbean, but we're seeing global impacts. So this is part of our shared global existence today, that we're all part of this, what's happening to the planet and our need to improve it. And I like to think about the enablers for sustainability as threefold. One, technology and digital transformation, I think, is an important part of that. And what we're finding in the Caribbean is that the way in which we're approaching this is way too slow. So we need policies to accelerate digital transformation to help buffer these shocks. For example, during the pandemic, of course, all of our small businesses and even large businesses had to immediately pivot to doing commerce over the internet. Now that we're sort of trying to emerge from this pandemic, I see in some cases not fully embracing digital transformation, but we're sort of in this hybrid world where people are still expecting a paper kind of response to something that can be done digitally, but we're not quite there yet. But digital transformation can really help, I think, ease some of the shocks that the region faces. It can help public service delivery better. We know this from Canada. In Canada, and I think this is an area where partnership with Canadians can really help to see how we can accelerate digital transformation in the region. In terms of government regulation, again, an enabler for sustainability, governments across the region must have the right policies in place. If I'm deciding where I'm going to make an investment, I'm going to go where I know the rule of law is very evident, where the rules of engagement for private businesses are very evident, where things are transparent, where data is available, and where the policies are enabling me to get on with my business as opposed to being an obstacle for doing business. And I think there's room for improvement across this region in terms of government support for modernizing the interaction between government and the public, government and the private sector, government and foreign investors, as a way to help us get to this kind of sustainable economic development and inclusive development that we're all talking about. Lastly, infrastructure. And on infrastructure, I'm going to include energy as an important aspect of that, because one of the reasons why the Caribbean has been lacking in competitiveness and not a region where firms have been flocking to is because of our high cost of electricity. Given the challenges of climate change and sustainability issues, the move towards renewable energy can't be more important as it is now. And we're seeing a transition, but it's fairly slow. We still see a lot of fossil fuel dependence across the region. That doesn't all go well for the future. And it means that investments in renewable energy can be one of the solutions. And I think here, there are tons of lessons from Canada as to how to do this. And we need to get on with that very quickly, not just because it will reduce the cost of energy so that businesses and citizens have cheaper access to electricity, but also because of the impact of, even though in our region contributes very little to greenhouse gas emissions in aggregate, but I think it's important to live up to those commitments we have made under various COP agreements over the years. But it also sends the right signal to citizens that this is an important aspect that everybody needs to be concerned about. And in terms of solutions, and where I think Canada can be extremely important in helping, someone mentioned earlier, education. I think the whole human capital development piece of the Caribbean needs a closer look. The kinds of students that are graduating from our high schools with the kinds of qualifications that they have and what they need are not what are going to take us into the 21st century very successfully. Productivity has been one of the biggest drags on economic growth for the region over decades. And if we dissect productivity, the human part of the productivity equation is a piece that I think we can really work to improve. And that means transforming curricula in schools. That means making sure that universities have the right partnerships, whether they're with Canadian universities or the cutting edge universities around the globe, to make sure that the skills that we need for the modern digital economies that we expect to be able to compete globally are what we have. And I think that's a very concrete way in which Canada can help. In terms of
Friends, just to say another 2 minutes, okay?
Okay, cool. there's been very little progress on trade agreements between Canada and the region. I think we've lost, that sort of fell off the agenda for CARICOM. There needs to be a resuscitation of those agreements, and I think this group is a good one to raise that in. The whole modernization of the public sector, I think Canada has done a really good job at that. Some countries in the Caribbean are moving very fast to digitize public services, and I want to highlight the Bahamas, for example. Barbados moving in this direction. Jamaica is moving in this direction. Guyana is moving in this direction, and more needs to be done. Where we have extractive industries in our region, I want to say Guyana, of course, sticks out with all of the oil finds that they have. I think Canada should be willing and ready to help Guyana manage the massive resources that are coming from that sector, and help Guyana do it in a way that is favorable for the environment moving for the future. And again, and lastly, on regional cooperation, I think there's a lot of debate going on right now as to how our foreign policy decisions are being made at the CARICOM level. Where's the cohesion? I think here Canada can provide some help and some examples to get us to have more cohesion in our foreign policy, and help us get to the kinds of advocacy we need. For example, the multidimensional vulnerability index, that will require a lot of advocacy in places like the UN, G20, G10, G7, and others. I'm going to stop there because I think that's plenty to digest. Thank you very much.
Therese, thank you so much. I know there's a lot more to say, but that was a very good summary and a great start to discussions. I'd now like to turn to Mr. Philip Jennings, who occupies a rather unique seat with respect to Canada CARICOM. He is the Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund for Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Canada, Dominica, Grenada, Ireland, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So a unique perch that gives him a foot in both Canada and the Caribbean. Without further ado, Philip, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you. And I'll jump in when I need to indicate time. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everybody. Just to say, as others have, it's a real pleasure to be part of this event, and I just thank you for the invitation, especially given my role, as was just outlined by Robert, that I do represent both Canada as well as 10 CARICOM countries at the International Monetary Fund. I've been asked to speak to kind of what is my role at the IMF. So I will speak to that, how it contributes to the Canada-Caribbean relationship. And I think importantly is what international financial institutions, in particular the IMF, are doing to contribute to supporting economic recovery and resilience in the Caribbean. So first is to say that I have spent most of my career in the Canadian Federal Public Service, working on issues that range from labor market and skills development to climate change to industrial policy. But in January, I had the privilege of being appointed to become one of the 24 members of the IMF Executive Board, which oversees the IMF operations. Specifically, as Robert mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for Canada, the Caribbean, and Ireland. And you should know that the IMF's 190 member countries are grouped into 24 constituencies, which are based on geographic location as well as like-mindedness. So Caribbean members of our constituency joined the IMF soon after their independence from the United Kingdom, and were part of our group from the outset, which helps demonstrate the long duration and strong friendship and partnership between Canada and the Caribbean. I should also mention that there's a similar situation at the World Bank. So where Canada leads a constituency that also includes many Caribbean countries and Ireland, and that my team and I work very closely with our counterparts at the World Bank. Many of you are likely familiar with the IMF, but for those who are not, I'll just mention that very broadly, its mandate is to help maintain global economic stability and promote strong and sustainable economic growth. And the IMF probably does get the most attention in the media when it provides financial assistance to a country. This is sometimes in the context of country-specific financial or currency crisis. And recent ones I can think of are Greece a decade ago and Argentina more recently. However, it also, of course, provides financial support in the context of global shocks, including the COVID pandemic, during which the IMF approved low-interest loans to over 80 countries, as well as a large allocation of what are called IMF special drawing rights, which are essentially low-interest credit lines available to each IMF member country. And while the financial support provided by the IMF gets the most of the headlines, a vital and fundamental role the fund plays is in the provision of economic assessments and policy advice to governments. An IMF endorsement of a country's economic policies is key to ensuring that a country can access funding from multilateral development banks as well as international capital markets. In addition to its lending and analysis functions, the IMF also provides important technical assistance and training to government officials, including through CARTAC, the Caribbean Technical Assistance Center. And Canada, I'm happy to say, has always been a major supporter of this work and provides at the moment the largest share of CARTAC's funding. Looping back to the role of an executive director, approval by the IMF executive boards is required for every new IMF loan or loan tranche, as well as a report on countries and of course for changes to IMF policies and instruments. As a result, there are many ways I work to advance the interests of the countries that I represent, from pushing for much IMF financial support and training a country as possible when there's requested by them, and ensuring that the IMF reports on our countries are fair and useful, and making sure that our country's priorities are reflected in IMF priorities. I should mention that I am the current chair of the board's Small States Working Group at the IMF, so thus have another forum to discuss the challenges and advocate for solutions for these countries. Canada and the Caribbean have a long history of friendship and partnership, and the fact that we are grouped together at the IMF and the World Bank provides another venue for Canada to keep current on views of the Caribbean and to advocate for those views. The interventions and written statements by Canada's Minister of Finance at the IMF ministerial meetings, as well as at G7 and G20 finance ministers, takes into account the views of Caribbean countries, especially on issues directly related to the IMF and the World Bank. And in my office, which includes 2 advisors from the Caribbean, 3 from Canada and 1 from Ireland, but also where every advisor has some aspect of their work focused on the Caribbean, we naturally find common ground on a day-to-day basis to advance our collective interests. Of course, this is made easier because, to be honest, many of the priorities of Canada and the Caribbean are the same. So we are both very focused, are all very focused on climate, the climate crisis, recovering from the pandemic, and job creation in our economies. So I'll speak a little bit about what the IMF is doing in this area, recognizing I only have a little bit of time to do this. So first, with respect to pandemic response, as I mentioned, that the fund made a very strong response globally to support countries. And for the CARICOM, it supported 9 countries to help address the pandemic-related financial needs. This included emergency financing for the Bahamas, Dominica, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a new multi-loan arrangement for Suriname, and a top-up to Barbados' pre-existing multi-year loan arrangement. The IMF also provides policy advice to members to navigate through the pandemic, and also calling for richer countries to be able to support poorer countries through the pandemic, including the acceleration of the global vaccine efforts. Second, the IMF is providing support and advice on how to build back better or build forward better, how government policies and programs can be tweaked to support stronger and more sustainable growth for citizens. And for countries that have unsustainable debt burden, the IMF can help countries through debt restructuring processes that help restore stability and growth. And thirdly, there's more and more work and focus by the IMF World Bank on issues of resiliency, especially related to climate change. The IMF has taken some major steps in this area recently. Last year, the IMF approved climate change strategy, through which agreed to systemically and strategically integrate economic and financial issues related to climate change and its core activities. This includes covering climate change related policy challenges more comprehensively in Article 4 consultations, which is the annual and biannual economic and policy assessments of each country, looking at climate risk and all its financial stability assessments and scaling up its climate related capacity development. And this year, another big step was taken, the establishment of the IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust, or RST for short. This is the first new major IMF funding vehicle in over 2 decades, and the first to provide finance to vulnerable middle-income countries in the Caribbean and elsewhere. Through the RST, eligible countries with regular or IMF arrangements can receive a top-up of funding up to, this is technical, but up to 150% of their quota to support policy reforms to reduce macro-critical risk associated with longer-term structural challenges of climate change and augment the policy space of financial buffers to mitigate the risk arising from those longer-term structural challenges. And I think the thing that's the most important to stress here is thanks to the advocacy that we had, as well as the members of our constituency, all small island developing states are eligible, even those that are above the income thresholds for eligibility typically. This is a recognition of the elevated vulnerability of small states to climate and other risks. As a result, the RST links access to concessional finance and vulnerability for the first time at the IMF. And we hope that this will spread to other international financial institutions as well, either by replicating the RST eligibility approach or by incorporating a multidimensional vulnerability index, which I understand is being advanced at the United Nations, the Commonwealth, and the Caribbean Development Bank. The IMF Executive Board approved the RST last month, and fundraising is now underway. I'm happy to say that Canada was among the first to pledge resources to the RST, contributing $2.5 billion to this. And we do think that the RST, and we'll continue to work to make the RST strongly benefit CARICOM countries. I'll stop there, and I just want to again thank you for the invitation to participate in this and the efforts to strengthen the relationship between Canada and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Philip, thank you very much for that presentation. It's a unique position that you occupy, and it's clear that you're very directly focused on issues of great relevance to the Caribbean. I'm going to turn now to Professor Andy Knight. Andy is at the University of Alberta. He's a distinguished professor there. I won't go through his long and quite amazing biography. He's just returning from a Fulbright distinguished chair assignment at Yale. He's back in Alberta. It's early morning out there, or was when we started. Thank you, Andy. But I'll turn it over to you now for some remarks. You'll be the last presenter, and then we'll try to squeeze some questions in.
Thank you very much, Robert. And first of all, I wanted to say I'm happy to be here to at least offer a few ideas of how we can move forward in this relationship between Canada and the Caribbean. And I was really heartened by the Honorable Greg Fergus's comments about Canada and the Caribbean, and really understand now that the Prime Minister of Canada is very much at the center of the initiatives to improve the relationships between the two countries in the Caribbean and Canada. There was some mention made about Winston Duperan's book on the Caribbean on the Edge. I wanted to flag that because I think that book is an excellent book to get a sense of the vulnerabilities facing the Caribbean as a region. And it reminds me of a forum on the future of the Caribbean that was held in Trinidad when I was there as director of the Institute of International Relations. And we worked closely with Mr. Duperan on trying to understand what we need to do to get Caribbean countries to move forward in the future and to deal with some of the challenges that the region faces. So with that, I thought instead of trying to sort of repeat some of the things that have already been said, excellent comments that have already been said about the vulnerabilities facing the region, I thought I should sort of focus on some recommendations that could be made, with the hope that perhaps Canada can assist the CARICOM countries to not only address the issues of climate change and the pandemic, now with the war in Ukraine, problems with commodity prices and so on, but also in a broader sense, to look at the areas where Canada really can help Caribbean countries develop and move forward. So first of all, I think the International Monetary Fund, and I'm glad that there was mention made just now about the IMF, and the World Bank Group and the International Development Banks and the G20 countries, Canada being a member of many of these clubs, should really consider special arrangements for CARICOM countries to help them with their debt relief. The biggest challenge for Caribbean countries, especially coming out of the pandemic, the challenges that the region faces with respect to increased debt load. There is a need for debt relief. There's a need for suspension of debt payments. And there's a need perhaps to write off some of the aging debt that by the Paris Club, I think. And this is something I think that Canadian government can actually help with. There's also a need for resources to assist the Pan American Health Organization in helping Caribbean countries deal with the extraordinary public health expenses that have been incurred as a result of the pandemic. As you know, the effects of COVID-19 has been so impactful on the region in a negative way, that we need to try to build and strengthen the health care systems in the region. And there's going to have to be some help given to the Caribbean as a region through the Caribbean Development Bank and Canadian government can assist with that. With respect to tourism, as you know, tourism has been a casualty of COVID-19 as well. And there's a need for greater cooperative relationships between CARICOM countries and Canada with respect to developing future travel protocols for testing when there are pandemics similar to the ones that we just faced. And of course, it seems to me that this is just the beginning of a series of pandemics that we may have to endure and to live with. So it's important, I think, for the Canadian government to use its own expertise and the way in which it handled COVID-19 pandemic to assist Caribbean countries in pre-testing passengers before they arrive to Canada, and just to help with the increase in tourist activity through that measure. In the area of energy security, I'm sure that this is something that should be of interest to IFIs, to the multilateral development banks, and to private investors as well, in Canada and elsewhere. But they should take advantage of the opportunities to develop renewable energy sources within CARICOM countries. You know, the need to sort of move away from the oil and gas to more renewable energy sources is something that I think most Caribbean countries want to address. Well, perhaps with the exception of Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname, most other Caribbean countries are in a deficit position with respect to energy, and I think that we have to start thinking seriously about how we can assist with the climate change situation by improving the capacity to develop other sources of energy. With respect to security, I know that's haven't been touched on a lot, but there is some major challenge with respect to security in the region. there needs to be a fund established for the acquisition of strategic regional maritime and airspace security capacity for CARICOM. Now, CARICOM already has a regional security management framework, as well as impacts, SEDIMA, and RSS, the regional security system. But they all seem to be suffering from a lack of resources that would allow them to build the kind of capacity to really deal with issues of transnational organized crime, to deal with some of the problems with gun running in the region, drug trafficking in the region, human trafficking as well. And I think Canada has a lot of experience working in this area and could work very closely with Caribbean military establishments and CARICOM's regional security system in order to be able to improve the conditions there. Now, on food security, which has become even more important these days, given the war in Russia versus Ukraine, and the impact this had on commodities and so on, I think there is a challenge for food security in the region. And maybe Canada can assist by working through the Food and Agriculture Organization, maybe the World Food Program, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, perhaps with the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, for example, to support studies dealing with transfer of knowledge and technology, and instituting regional agencies like the Caribbean, or strengthening regional agencies like the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, CARDI, which I think is located in Trinidad still, and the National Agricultural Research Institutes. Now, the international financial institutions, I think, can help by aligning their lending policies to some regional needs of food security for the region by providing finance for a regional shipping facility between CARICOM countries. This is really sorely needed. I'm, having spent some time in Trinidad as director of the Institute of International Relations, I was baffled by the fact that not much attention is being paid to creating that kind of facility that would allow people to move from the fields to markets in the region. And I think that can probably use some help from Canada to nudge this forward. I'm going to be very quickly go through two more, and then I'll end here. Some mention was made of correspondent banking relations. And I think there could be a cooperative relationship developed between Canada and CARICOM countries to reduce the stranglehold that the United States has had in this area of correspondent banking relations. I think this is really being a disadvantage to Canada in many to the CARICOM region in many respects. And maybe Canada can assist with that. Finally, I think with the possibility of a surge in hurricanes this coming year, I think Caribbean countries are going to need some help in terms of establishing a Caribbean recovery fund to deal with this. As you know, when hurricanes hit the region, sometimes it can throw the entire country, an entire small country, back 20 years in terms of its development. Or the volcanoes that we saw with St. Vincent and the Grenadines can have major impact, negative impact on the economies of small island states. So there's a need to build resiliency to address hurricanes, understanding that we need to have some alert mechanisms to help us to deal with this, but also to have a recovery fund in place to deal with these hurricanes as they show up. So finally, I just want to say that of the 14 CARICOM countries, and Canada has a good relationship with all of them, 6 of them are IDA countries, defined by their lowest, by sort of lowest per capita income. The remaining 8 are excluded from any sort of concessional financial arrangements. This situation, I think, just leads to a problem with the increased debt, public debt that these countries face. Canada can help us to assist, I think, with trying to reduce the level of debt that these countries are facing. So those are the kinds of things that I think could be addressed. And I'm sure in the discussions later on, we can go through some of these things in more detail. Thank you very much, Robert.
Andy, thank you very much for that presentation. A lot of good food for thought there, enumerating some very specific areas of possible collaboration. We've got about 20-25 minutes left, and I know that Ambassador Ford has to dash. I think she's traveling today. I'm going to just use the moderator's prerogative and go directly to a couple of questions for her, perhaps. If you've got time, Ambassador. We know that both Canada and CARICOM value the longstanding relationship that they have. Heads of government are meeting in coming weeks at both the Summit of the Americas and CHOGM. These are important opportunities to meet, obviously, but also to agree on new initiatives. Are there any new initiatives that are in the works that you're in a position to share at this stage, or what could you tell us about expectations there? I guess a second question to you, Ambassador. You mentioned, or others have mentioned, the increased engagement on the part of senior officials and ministers of Canada and CARICOM, and a roadmap that has been agreed. It would be useful, I think, to get some of the specificity around that roadmap. There has been, as has been noted, the recent formation of the Canada CARICOM Institute, 6 universities on either side, and there's a great deal of interest in this forum today. We might be able to bring some academic and other research heft to some of your roadmap issues. Is there anything that you can tell us about that as well?
Thank you very much, and thanks for thanks for your questions. Professor Knight did actually quite a good job of making some recommendations, and I can say that the recommendations are very closely aligned to the areas of priority for CARICOM member states, and certainly any projects emanating from the Summit of the Americas, that could be of interest to CARICOM broadly and to CARICOM member states, would need to speak to the whole question of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly, the challenges with climate change and climate finance, food and nutrition security. Only last week in the region, Guyana just hosted, on behalf of CARICOM member states this past week, an important agriculture and an investment in agriculture forum, Agro-Invest Forum, this past week. And the whole focus of that was to try to reduce our food import bill by 2025. There are other areas also. Professor Knight also spoke to the whole question of the impact of climate change and natural disasters, and certainly the challenges that the heightened vulnerability of our region whenever, for example, there's a hurricane. We saw the fallout from the ash in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and how it would have affected, the tourism in the other islands. So with specific projects, I understand, and the CARICOM Secretariat is not actually a member of the summit implementation group, but I understand that there are interesting projects which could help to address some of the challenges we raised, which would certainly be of interest and benefit to member states. I understand that there's an interesting project which should be announced for renewable energy, focused on energy security and climate vulnerabilities. So certainly that is something which would be of interest to member states. Your other question, if you can remind me, sorry, I'll take notes.
Well, the other question was in terms of the roadmap.
The roadmap, yes.
Where can the interested participants here and in academia maybe put some of their effort to help drive the Canada CARICOM process forward?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Canada's Foreign Minister Joly met with CARICOM ministers only this past April 1st, 2022. And we agreed to collaborate on certain themes, especially in light of the post-pandemic challenges faced by the region. And the thematic areas within the whole area of regional security and stability. And again, some of the recommendations from Professor Knight spoke directly to those issues. The whole question of multilateral cooperation, especially given the important role that Canada plays and the membership of Canada and the access of Canada to certain corridors of power, to which the CARICOM doesn't belong. Certainly, we have a representative of the World Bank constituency here. And also in the area of building a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. So there are certain key areas that fall within these rubrics, which are definitely right for academic focus and research that can help to guide the process forward in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you, Ambassador. And I will just say thanks for your tremendous participation today. If you do need to log off and catch your plane, please do so when you need to.
Okay, thank you. I want to hear what everyone else has to say, so I'll give you a few more minutes.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
I guess one of the questions that came in from the Q&A app, I'll put it out there. I'm not sure that there's anybody on our panel, unfortunately, who's in a position maybe to speak to it. I certainly don't want to put the Honorable Greg Fergus on the hook, but the question was that CARICOM, of course, has issued a commission report on reparations for slavery, and how has the Canadian response played into that commission report, and then what is the government of Canada doing? As I say, Mr. Fergus, I don't want to put you on the spot. If that's something that we park for a further discussion, I'm quite happy to do that. But I did want to get it out there because it was a Q&A that came in.
I think it's an important question, and Robert, I wouldn't be able to answer on behalf of the government for that, for sure. Yeah. Whatever response that the government would put onto the question of reparations or to an apology or an apology and reparations would be a made in Canada response, I think, first of all. Secondly, I know that there is an active, there are many folks in Canada who've been bringing forward that question. And so there's an active consideration of that. But no, there's nothing that I would be able to point to and say, well, there's a strategy here, or there's going to be a response by such and such a date. that would be just tremendously premature. But I don't want anyone to think that that isn't something that hasn't been raised and actively raised by many players within the country.
Thanks so much. And again, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I did want to get the question on the table. Another question that has come in, and also from some of our thinking beforehand, and I guess it really goes to Therese and to Philip, and it's around the the development of so-called multi-dimensional vulnerability index, or what the Caribbean Development Bank is calling a recovery duration adjuster. I guess in a nutshell, what is trying to be accomplished by those efforts? They're very complex. They're very time-consuming to develop. But what are we trying to get at there? And what's the state of play in the IFIs? And what are the prospects if these are indices that are going to be helpful? What are the prospects of moving forward with it? You touched on it briefly, Philip, but maybe I could get reactions from both of you. Therese and Philip.
Yeah, maybe I can start. Thanks, Robert. I mean, I think, from my IFI days, the complexity is around, having how many different indices do we have across all of the 184, say, UN members, and how do we make sure that we're not, carving out too many special segments for certain types of countries. And I think we know where this can lead. And you're right to say it's pretty complex. I mean, the UN's been working on this now for a long time, and there's a paper there to be read and digested. But even there, it's pretty complex. I mean, the need for it arises, of course, because of all of what we've been describing. Like, there are vulnerabilities that we know that are pretty specific to our region. And how do those vulnerabilities get addressed in a global context where there's still, as IMF would say, uniformity of treatment across countries? And obviously, if you look at the Caribbean, if you look at the debt levels across the region, a lot of the pileup of debt can directly be associated with external shocks, especially natural disasters in Eastern Caribbean countries, for example. So, but I think where the rubber hits the road is in halls where everyone's represented and where richer countries are trying to allocate their resources to the poorest countries across this globe. And I think at the IMF, for example, poor countries, the definition using GDP per capita, and low-income countries is and also at the World Bank, very specific definitions to access to concessional financing. And the reason is that concessional financing is a scarce resource. So I think globally, owners of the capital want to make sure that where those resources get allocated is really where the biggest needs are. There will always be, I think, ways to create an index that could position the Caribbean in a better place to have access to concessional financing. I think this debate is going to rage on for some time, but I think as climate change and as sustainability issues become more acute, and as natural disasters become more severe and more frequent, fiscal situations across the Caribbean are going to become quite severe. And I think international organizations will have to deal with trying to carve out some special arrangements for this group of countries. I think CDB is on the right track in terms of what they're trying to do. But as you mentioned, Robert, it takes a lot of different analysis, and you can slice economics a lot of different ways to come up with a set of indicators that will always show that these countries need some extra support. I think the real question for richer countries is, how does Canada, how does Germany, how does the UK, how does the US decide where they're going to allocate their aid resources to countries that on average, but have many, many more people falling in the category of being poor and extremely poor. So I think this is really the question. It's quite difficult, as you say, but I think the work is definitely worth doing, and we're getting closer to coming up with something that makes sense for the region.
Thanks, Therese. Philip, do you have anything you can add?
Yeah, maybe just a few things. Some of that will be repeating, but also to add. So just, I mean, maybe just to say a few things from the outset is just to say that at the IMF and the other international institutions, there is a clear recognition of the vulnerabilities and unique challenges that small developing states do face. And I do think that, you know, the thing that certainly, unfortunately, has happened in recent years is the radical impact that shocks can have on small countries has been seen. So we're seeing, you know, the pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its impact, natural, you know, sort of disasters that have occurred because of climate change. And on a positive note, which I mentioned already, is within the IMF, there's a recognition that something had to be done, and there was an establishment of the RST. So for the first time, we kind of agreed vulnerability is important. And what was agreed in that case was, you know, let's get away from our traditional ways to decide what threshold based on income. And we brought in all the small developing states to be eligible to access this kind of concessional funding. So from that perspective, it's really positive. And what's also positive is, maybe not a surprise, but, you know, in my role as representing Canada and the Caribbean and Ireland, is that we were advocates for this. But what's more important is that the board was. So at the end of the day, this was a very broad consensus in terms of creating this tool and how it was done. Second thing I'd say, which kind of goes a little bit to the question a bit more directly, is I think the value of these indexes is, at the end of the day, like, it's to bring some level of cohesion. Because when you have multiple indexes, people don't agree with it. It can actually lead to inaction. So kind of find a way, like, what is the index that we're going to and use? So in essence of kind of creating one that can kind of get the buy-in by countries to actually use it as a tool to be able to make decisions. And I think, to be honest, speaking on behalf of Canada in this case, is that Canada does support the work of the UN in terms of what it's doing, in terms of trying to bring some cohesion here, is following it very closely to see how the work progresses. And I think that the IMF is same, is that looking through, and then once the work is completed, and, you know, I think Therese is right to say it may take longer than expected, but at least there's a plan to try to have some sort of a sense of the process being done by this December. Is then at that point is looking, how can this tool be useful for what the IMF does and what Canada does and what other institutions do in terms of how they want to apply it for their own support of countries around the world. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Philip. I'm going to go now to a question to Andy, and I must say it's a big question. So you probably got plenty of field here, but amid the ongoing great power competition that we're all witnessing over the past few years, in the short term, it may be even more challenging for small developing states to have their voice heard. What are your thoughts on how Caribbean countries in particular can work more effectively with traditional partners such as Canada to secure their own interests and to carve out space for themselves in a really complex international arena?
Yeah, that's a big question, and but I'm going to make an attempt at this. In large part, what I was doing at Yale University for my Fulbright was to look at the question of what I call shifting hegemony. The reality is that there are some broader issues at stake here besides the individual itemized things I talked about in my presentation. One of those big issues has to do with the fact that there is, in fact, we are living in an interregnum, a period of time in which we see evidence of a transition from one world order to the next. The 1945 world order is under attack, as you know. Russia is proving this. with this attack on Ukraine, fundamentally challenging the UN Charter. And I think there are a number of other ways in which we can see this shift occurring, this movement away from the 1945 world order to something else that we don't quite yet know what it is. But I think how Canada can help in this transitional moment, as I like to put it, I call it an interregnum, is that the Canadian government and Canadian academics and civil societal groups and so on can support other civil societal groups in the Caribbean as they try to navigate, their way around this problem. As you know, China is always a big elephant in the room, right? China is in the Caribbean. Some of the Belt and Road initiatives are obviously being utilized as a means of sort of getting more Caribbean countries on board of China's own view of the world. And that's a challenge, right? Because our value systems are closer to the Caribbean value system, as you say, closer to the Canadian value system than it is to the Chinese value system. But we need to find a way for Canada to support Caribbean countries to navigate this challenge. Now, I think we see some signs that the International Monetary Fund and the IFIs are doing things to sort of make this occur. But are they doing enough? And can the Canadian government help those IFIs to do even more to reduce the level of debt and so on, and the burden of debt that Caribbean countries face? Or will Caribbean countries continue to look to China as a point of relief for the economic challenges that it faces? So I think this is one of the broad sort of macro geopolitical questions that we face. And as academics, I think we spend a lot of time trying to understand what this shift is all about, where it's going. But I think at the end of the day, the Canadian government and the Canadian academics and so on can assist Caribbean countries, Caribbean institutions like the UE, try to understand what this shift will really mean for the future of the Caribbean.
Andy, thanks very much. And I have to say we're just about running out of time. Before I turn it over to High Commissioner Miller from Jamaica, just to say a quick word of thanks and goodbye. I just wanted for the benefit of the panelists and the audience, just to flag some of the other questions that had come in, and I wish we'd had time for. One was related to accelerating digitization. How do we handle the corresponding concerns around privacy and confidentiality there? What can Canada and CARICOM do together to more effectively fight the scourge of money laundering? Tourism, how can the Caribbean build back their market and create new opportunities after COVID? How do we deal with jointly with and allocate resources to address the challenges associated with movement of people? How can CARICOM, I guess, assist and fit in with our Canada's international education strategy to double the number of international students? And there are others that I don't have time to read, but all of this suggests to me we've got risk for certainly other events, maybe more focused. We'll certainly be thinking about that with the CARICOM group here in Ottawa and with CIC and the Canada Caribbean Institute. I'm going to sign off, or not sign off, but I'm going to give the mic to High Commissioner Miller of Jamaica. Yes, she is there. But I will say that I will not come back on after she has her remarks. We'll sign off right after that. So thank you everyone for your participation. Really appreciated it. Over to you, High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Reddy. Colleagues, moderators, presenters, participants. It is the pleasure of the Caucus of Heads of Mission in Ottawa, CARICOM Heads of Missions in Ottawa, as we enhance our public diplomacy outreach to convene this year's CARICOM-CANADA Policy Forum with our named partners. We heard from our presenters about the importance of shaping a new partnership with one of our most valuable and long-standing partner, and some considerations for a path to achieve the resilience and recovery which are needed to enable growth and empowerment of our people. Recognition of the vulnerabilities of our economies, the importance of human capital and other sustainable development initiatives, application of advanced technological solutions, knowledge transfer, as well as migratory flows and our shared values are key drivers in shaping a partnership for recovery and resilience. There was mention in this partnership of the IFI's support for strengthened healthcare systems, energy, food security, etc. On behalf of the CARICOM Heads of Mission in Ottawa, the Canada Caribbean Institute, the Canadian International Council, National Capital Branch, I extend our gratitude to the Honorable Greg Fergus, Ambassador Donna Ford, Mr. Reese Turner-Jones, Mr. Philip Jenkins, Professor Andy Knight, and of course to our most capable moderators, Her Excellency Sherry Truss and Ambassador Robert Reddy, and to you, our participants. We are pleased to have provided this opportunity for dialogue and look forward to continued interaction with our panelists and you, our guests, as we work to realize our vision of a better, stronger post-pandemic world. I thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you.